Hey guys, my name's Callaners, and today I'll be looking at my research topic, the reasons why I personally decided to look into this topic, the surrounding literature on this topic, and the various theoretical and frameworks and methods used by authors when they are looking at this topic as well, and finally the significance of this topic and why I think it's an important topic to look at. So my topic was, is there a link between the type and quality of economic institutions in oil-rich nations that hindered the growth of democracy in those countries? And the reason why I wanted to have a look at this was because I was interested in why the Middle East as a region seemed to be struggling and didn't really want to adopt democracy as a political institution, and I found it really interesting that there was a link between the presence of oil in the region and the lack of democratic reform in the region. So looking at the literature that's been written on this, the major article was one called "Does Oil Hinder Democracy?" This was probably the pivotal argument that found that yes, there was a definite link between the presence of oil and hindering democracy, not just in the Middle East, but in other, developing regions around the world. And the causal link found here was that authoritarian regimes, which had oil wealth, were less likely to undergo democratic reform. This concept was built on in an article called "Oil Non-Tax Revenue and Redistributional Foundations of Regime Stability," where the author found that obviously oil led to greater financial wealth for the authority in that country, and then if that authority happened to be an authoritarian government, they had more money to invest to keeping themselves in power, which is why oil and authoritarian regimes led to really hindering democratic reform. I think the issue was outlined in a different article called "Oil, Democracy and Context," which really said, yes, there is a link between oil and the hindering of democracy in the Middle East, but it doesn't explain why in Latin America the presence of oil almost seemed to be helping democratic reform go through. And so that's why I decided to look at institutions and try to see if there was a specific reason relating to oil as to why it hindered economic development in some regions, but really helped economic development in other regions. Looking at the theoretical frameworks and the methods of some of these articles, there really seem to be four major themes split into two groups. The two major competing themes was whether research should be done on a global scale or region by region scale. Some people argued you couldn't, like in the "Does Oil Hinder Democracy" article, argued that you couldn't understand the impact oil had on democracies and democratic reform by looking at it from a region by region perspective, and other articles argue that you had to, because of the really different impacts that oil has had in regions like the Middle East compared to Latin America. You really had to look at it from a region by region perspective. And the other theoretical point of difference was people who argue that it was really political institutions, authoritarian regimes that, when combined with oil wealth, really stagnated democratic reform, or was it economic institutions and a real weak inability to redistribute the wealth of this oil wealth that really stagnated democratic growth in the region? The methods used, most of the articles that I found, the method was a statistical analysis. The author would run various statistical analyses and then comment on the possible impacts of the statistical analysis. Finally, I'm going to look at the "so what" part of the presentation. And so I think the really important part is the impact is political, and that is and I'm not claiming that I can solve the Middle East problem, but I think every bit of research into why the Middle East is not accepting democracy can help both the Middle East and us here in the West and in other regions in the world to really understand, what makes the Middle East tick, and to try and combat the problems in the Middle East with solutions that are tailor-made for the region, and not just, put the blanket assumption on, well, it worked in the West, so it should work in the East as well. And I think that research in this area can really help repair the damaged relationship between the West and the Middle East, and I think that's really important. So thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks.